Hello there. As a Star Trek fan, let's face it, we have something of a reputation. We have a reputation for being a bunch of usually single virgins living in their mother's basement, occasionally getting dressed up, going to conventions to pretend to be somebody else because we really love Star Trek. Now, I'm not saying that not some, if not all of that isn't true in my case, or at least hasn't been at some point in my life. Some of it still is, but it's not overly a fair assessment, really, is it? Personally, I have loved Trek since I was a kid. Now, this little bit of a podcast is just gonna be about my love of a science fiction franchise that has defined so many things in my life, to help me define who I am, and for a TV show to have such a profound impact on me, for me to spend so much of my time creating content for YouTube and other platforms, all dedicated to Star Trek. I can literally sit there for ages making memes and not feel mentally and physically exhausted with the amount of time and energy I put into Star Trek. Now, it's not to say that I don't like and genuinely love other science fiction franchises. I'm a huge Stargate fan. I like Star Wars quite a lot. Quite frankly, that this can just go on. I'm not going to carry on with that, but Star Trek has always been my go-to. It's something that I started off with when I was a kid, coming home from school, and it'd be on in the UK. It'd be on the BBC Two at I think 6 o'clock, or it might have been 6:45 at night. A couple of times a week. Back then it was the original series and Next Generation. The others hadn't been made yet. And I can remember having conversations with my dad, things like, Dad, who's better, Picard or Kirk? And quite frankly, my dad just told me, Dad, you pick. Which one do you like more? It was oddly one of the first instances in my life that I can recall where I was told that the choice was entirely mine. I didn't have to, I could formulate an opinion. Bear in mind, I was very, very young, so that was a profound thought for someone at my age at the time. And Star Trek, in a lot of ways, has defined how I view the world, my moral outlook, which generally, I don't identify with like a political view, never have. It's why I stay out of politics in a lot of my videos. I think, quite frankly, entertainment of any description, if you can define anything I make as entertainment, should be escapism from real world problems. So, if in nothing else, my political views, I tend to fall completely down the middle, and I'm neither one side aligned more than the other. Neither particularly strongly left-leaning nor particularly strongly right-leaning. I don't have strong views one way or the other on almost anything, and a lot of that has been learnt from space socialism known as Star Trek, which theoretically should make me very left-leaning, shouldn't it? I would say maybe, but here's what it is. Star Trek, as I've said, has been something that has been a lifelong passion of mine. I have always enjoyed it. I've enjoyed every iteration of it, and I reject people that turn around generation to generation, year to year. I get it all the time in comments. I get it in sometimes in messages that stick to old Trek. New Trek isn't Trek. It's like, do you realize that when Star Trek Enterprise was released, let's think back, when Star Trek Enterprise came out, so many people were like, this isn't Star Trek, this isn't the Star Trek I knew. A lot of people said it about Deep Space Nine. People argued that Deep Space Nine, bear in mind, that it was the first Star Trek created after Gene Roddenberry, the original creator of Star Trek, had died. And a lot of people said, DS9 is not Star Trek. They're not exploring space, not really. That's why the runabout and stuff was invented and eventually got the Defiant, but it was so action-orientated. Unlike the original series, the animated series, and the Next Generation that had come before it, it wasn't episodic, at least not fully. It had shades and early sort of development of the idea of being an anthology, and everything leading in to the next story, constantly evolving the characters and the plot with a single ongoing arc. DS9 did that. Enterprise did it really well in Season 3. And DS9 did it really well from about Season 3 onwards, all the way up to the final episode, What We Leave Behind. So, in that regard, Star Trek evolves and changes, and it means different things to different people. There's a whole generation of people now who have been introduced to Star Trek. So like it, hate it, love it, whatever. The JJ verse introduced a lot of people to Star Trek. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of the JJ verse, but it's nothing to do with a generational thing. I just think it's a little too Star Wars. But I don't know whether this is a controversial opinion or not. I don't really like J.J. Abrams. I think he's overrated. I think he's a bit of a hack who can't write an ending. He doesn't make anything that's original. Everything he makes is a remake or a rehash of something that somebody else has done. Star Trek included. He basically clearly wanted to make Star Wars. It was almost like he was putting together a fan film of Star Wars to present to Lucasfilm to go, look what I could do for you. Not saying that's what he did, because of course he didn't. I will say that I do genuinely believe that J.J. Abrams is a Star Trek nerd. He is a fanboy, but he's also Hollywood elite, and he's a money man, and he's a bit creatively bankrupt in that regard. He is still, ironically, one of the better ones there, but not a big fan personally. I don't like what he did with Star Trek, and I don't actually like what he did with Star Wars either. I'm getting off topic, but these things introduced a whole new generation to Star Trek. It means something to them. I can watch Star Trek over and over. I watch clips almost on the daily. I Google Star Trek periodically. I look up the actors that have been in Star Trek. It's why you occasionally see posts on my channel of someone's passed away, because I keep an eye on that news. I look out for it. I get updates in my Google, because obviously there's loads of bots and various different algorithms and cookies on my phone, my computer. They're probably saying this guy looks up Star Trek a lot. So I have adverts for Star Trek. The games come up constantly in my feed. Things like that. And there are different aspects of Star Trek. Now, for those of you that watch my videos, you notice that I stick very heavily to alpha canon. There are different types of canon within Star Trek. Unlike in Star Wars, for example, using it as an obvious one, everything Star Wars is canonical. Everything they make, games, movies, TV series, animated series, it's all canon. And Star Trek isn't the same way. You've got your alpha canon. Alpha canon is purely what is on the screen. Sometimes I give an opinion, sometimes I make some suppositions, but generally speaking, I have to scour dialogue, scour my memory, which has a lot of it seared in there after 30 years of watching this stuff and burning it into the back of my eyes. But that is alpha canon, right? It's just what's on screen. That's it. Nothing else is canon, not alpha. Beta canon, you're looking at Star Trek Online, stuff like that. Now, there's nothing wrong with including that in videos. I choose not to, just because, as I've said in a previous video, it becomes very convoluted and overly complicated and often contradictory. Quite often, particularly Star Trek Online, contradicts alpha canon because it has its own story, and because Star Trek has a multiverse, it's very easy to simply write these things off as that's the multiverse of Star Trek. That's another mirror universe. It's not the Terran Empire's mirror universe, but it's certainly a mirror universe of some description, and that's all fine. So in that regard, it's all alpha canon, but it's not prime universe alpha canon, which is why I tend not to include it. That said, I do really enjoy, as you can see from if you're watching any of the footage that might be on the screen, if you're watching this on YouTube, there's footage of gameplay. This is me playing Star Trek Online. I don't play it a lot because I'm not really a big gamer. I also don't read a lot of the Star Trek books. I do have some of them, and I have read a lot of them. I've listened to some of them as audiobooks as well, the ones I can get. Thing is, I work a lot. I mean, a lot. And not only with YouTube, but various other things, including a full-time job where I work up to 60 hours a week doing that. I don't have a lot of time to sit and read, so I read the comics because they're quicker and easier, and I've read some of the books and I've listened to some of them on audio. But I haven't digested the books thoroughly. Quite often what I end up doing is actually watching breakdowns of them on YouTube or other platforms, as well as basically cliff note skimming, getting the basics. And that tends to work for me in those regards. But the books and the beta canon sources aren't as big a thing for me because I'm not a huge gamer. I mean, I love Warcraft, but again, not got the time to commit to playing it, so I don't play it anymore. But I love the Resident Evil games because I'm a big horror fan. I also like a game for the old PlayStation 2 called The Suffering, which is another awesome game, quite similar to Resident Evil in basic theme. It's kind of dark and violent and weird. But I'm not a big gamer, so sitting there and playing Star Trek Online all the time for me is not really a thing. So I mostly now use it really to get stock footage for things like this. So, but I do enjoy it, and when I get into it, I can sit there, and that's part of the problem. Once I get into a game, I'm one of those people that will sit there for days and probably not eat, lose loads of weight, and I could die at my computer playing a game. So it's good to sort of pull myself away and not do it. It's like I've tried Halo and stuff like that, and again, once I start, I tend to start just staying on it, and I never come away. It's one of the reasons I shy away from Warhammer. But Star Trek has always been one of the things that means a great deal to me. It's, as I said, going back to the beginning, when I was very young, I was born a little bit before the Next Generation would have started, and I was very young when it came on, and it was one of the best things on television, as far as I was concerned. From a very young age, I was into X-Men comics, on other sci-fi and sort of fantasy mediums. I liked a cartoon that I can't for the life of me think much of. It was really about mathematics, apparently, but it was called Flight of the Dragons. I saw it as fantasy. I liked Dragon Slayer, the movie. I always gravitated towards action, adventure, fantasy, sci-fi themes, particularly science fiction and fantasy. And Star Trek had a quality, an intellectual quality, which I think it is the thinking man's sci-fi, personally. And I'm not trying to say that I'm a particularly intellectual person. I will go as far as to say in my own defense, I'm not completely without brain cells, but I do credit much of my analytical nature and my ability to, or desire rather, to pull myself away from a problem and look at it objectively and try to find a rational solution. A lot of that comes from things I learned from Star Trek. It's more than just my inherent natural way of being. It's something I learned from Star Trek, from Spock, from Data, from Picard. It's something that I value as a character trait in myself. My ability to objectively look at a problem and find a solution that doesn't involve aggression or violence, that doesn't involve hurting other people, that is a solution that is the best possible outcome for as many people involved as possible. I say that because in real world, what part of my job is a lot of management, and I deal with a lot of people, and I'm responsible for people's wages and a variety of other things that determine, whether those people get to still own their house. So, decisions. It's something I value as a character trait in myself, and I do attribute a lot of that to my time watching Star Trek. And it's different to other science fiction franchises. Some people find it too slow, or too plodding, or too, I want to say, too intellectual. And I don't mean to be insulting, but there are many people who, if it doesn't have a lot of boom, and it doesn't have a lot of quick-paced action and stories that accelerate quickly, there are a lot of people that simply don't have time or the appreciation to sit there and really listen to the dialogue, to learn from the story. It's not something they want or can do. And again, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. Different things appeal to different people, and everyone's entitled to like exactly what they like. But in the case of Star Wars tends to be very much about the spectacle and about the big and the grand, whereas Star Trek has quite often been about the reserved and the observation. And yeah, I can think of animations and cartoons, which we've probably all seen, that rip this to shit. They take the piss out of it, about how, you got Vader calling Picard a nerd, and he's trying to deny it. Well, Data's there talking about wanting to come go do Shakespeare or come to his poetry recital, and we all have seen these, and it's like, yeah, it's kind of true, isn't it? I'm going to be honest, right? This is me being completely earnest. I go to a lot of conventions. I'm hoping to go to the Star Trek convention at the NEC in Birmingham this year. in 2023. I've been to many Star Trek conventions, but I've also been to Comic-Cons, and I've been to one Star Wars convention. And there's a reason I've only been to one Star Wars convention. It was the single most commercial experience of my life. I'm autistic. I don't do well with crowds and loud noise. And the Star Wars convention was one of the most crowded. At first I thought, wow, this thing's popular. Because I'd been to Comic-Cons and Star Trek conventions and some other conventions, HorrorCon, things like that. They're nowhere near as crowded. And I thought, But then you get this sense that people are there not because they love Star Wars, but because they want to be seen liking Star Wars. I know people, without naming who it is, and they're kind of pretentious douchebags that they're not really nerds. They want to be seen as a nerd. They're the nerdy one in their group. And they can't stand me because I out-nerd them by accident. And they just want to be the quirky nerdy in their group. And they're the kind of people that go to Star Wars conventions just to say they've been to a Star Wars convention. Which, respect. Do it. Go to a Star Wars convention. But at the same time, don't be a douche about it. It's like, most of the people there were, and they weren't real fans. You got a lot of the cosplayers and a lot of the hardcore Star Wars fans, and they're lovely people. But the actual convention overall was so commercial. You had to pay for everything. Unlike at a Star Trek convention where you get free talks and you have audiences with a lot of the actors, and you can they all sit there and you can go and pay for autographs and stuff. And some of it's not overly expensive. I remember, I think it was Hannah Haiti. It was only like £5 for her autograph. Others, it was no more than I think it was Ethan Phillips, was like £15 or £20, which he owes me, by the way, because I paid for a photo with him, and he buggered off back to the States before I got it, and I never got a refund. I'm just saying, if he's watching or listening, you owe me, Ethan. I want that picture and I want that autograph. Not really, I don't really hold a grudge, but things like that. It's the difference between a Star Trek and a Star Wars convention. The feeling you have of community and sort of a bunch of outcasts coming together. Because the one thing you can say is the difference, with most sci-fi franchises, they have their core audience. And Star Trek in particular does have a core audience. I'm definitely part of that. Others are more mainstream, like Star Wars. Even Battlestar and Stargate are a lot more mainstream. They're more widely accepted. The Star Trek has this perception, going back to the beginning of the video. If you're a Star Trek fan, you are a 40-year-old virgin living in your mother's basement. And you walk around the house in like Star Wars pajamas pretending to, phaser people and shit. And, I'm not saying that doesn't happen. It certainly does. I've got those uniforms and those phasers. But it's not the only aspect of it. But because we're kind of a nerdy, goofy, idiot bunch of people that love something that's basically fiction so much that we embrace it as a lifestyle, it brings us together as outcasts. And that's something which I do fit well in. Ironically, group of outcasts, whereas Star Wars again can be very mainstream, and the people that are in it, they're popular. They're not geeks and nerds who find talking to a girl difficult. And there's the other stereotype as well, that there are no women Star Trek. God, I'm trying to learn a Ferengi there. No women Star Trek fans. My wife's a Star Trek fan. There are, and she might be the only one, but they definitely exist. And yeah, it's meant a lot to me over the years, in that it helped bring me out of my shell. I was a very quiet child. I wasn't identified as autistic as a child. I was just quiet because it was the 1980s. I was just shy and quiet. And Star Trek basically taught me that you can be accepted no matter what. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what you love, what you like, what you do. You can just be. And that was a lesson, something I really liked that Star Trek taught me. And I'm glad that I've experienced that in my life. And I'm glad I have this. It's why I can sit here or stand here or wherever I do a video. Sometimes I do them at work because I'm bored. No, I don't. I never do that on my break, clearly. God. That I can do that, and it doesn't burn me out. I don't lose my mind in this. I don't completely burn out and be incapable of doing anything else. I don't just sit in this room or in my living room doing nothing else and thinking this is real, or it has helped me. It has taught me something about how to morally guide myself in the world, and that is absolutely amazing for a television show. It's entertainment. Entertainment is, without getting too philosophical, entertainment and comedy and drama, escapism, is as human and as natural and as much a part of our culture and society as religion, war, or society itself. As intelligent, sentient beings, as people, we naturally crave escapism, we naturally crave entertainment. There's a reason you're attracted to charismatic and funny people, and there is more to it than that. It's because your mind works different. A dog doesn't need to laugh. We need to laugh. We learn differently to other creatures. And an art form like this, a medium like Star Trek, just like Shakespeare, just like the Odyssey, the Iliad, these things are escapism. They're moral stories that help people learn what is right from wrong within their respective generation, within their society. And it is one thing that Star Trek understood. It is one thing that Gene Roddenberry understood. And it is one thing I learned from this show. And I owe it so much because of that. And I never grow tired of it. I don't have an issue with Kurtzman Trek. I don't like the JJ verse that much, but that said, I did think a lot of the performances were excellent, and the films are still good in their own right. They're kind of bottom of the run for me, but doesn't mean I don't like them. In fact, there's nothing Star Trek I don't like. There are odd episodes, yes. There are characters, yes, certainly. It's not like it's free from criticism, of course not. But because it has defined me as a person, it has helped build me, I have forever patience for it, and every time new Star Trek comes out, I am so excited and so happy, because it's like being a child again to me. It's like being back there when I'm like 5-6 years old, lying on the sofa or lying on the floor in front of the fire watching Star Trek with my dad. And my dad was no Trekkie, to be fair, but he did like Star Trek. He liked Farscape and things like that. He did actually enjoy it. And my dad was a workaholic, so he was at work a lot. And it was pretty much one of the few times I really spent any time with him. So I have that memory from being a child where I got to spend a bit of time with my dad as a child. And that was nice. It's a nice memory to have. And Star Trek, again, it gave that to me. So that's why I love it. And I really want to know why everyone else out there loves Star Trek. What brought you to it? Was it just the story? Was it the characters? Was it some personal thing? For me, it's a combination of everything. I was quite a without needing sympathy of anyone, because I don't, but I was quite not a lonely child, because I don't miss people. It's an autism thing. But I didn't really have friends, and I didn't go out. So Star Trek was my world. And bear in mind, back then you had 4 channels on TV. So there wasn't as much out there. So it was a lot to me back then. But what brought everyone else to it? Let me know in the comments below. Tell me in some way, shape or form what it was brought you to Star Trek. And if you're commenting on this on YouTube, just let me know you reached the end of this particular podcast. Put, I don't know, a little crying face in the comments, because why not cry? With that said, I think we're at the end of this little ramble about my personal love of Star Trek. Thank you for listening or watching or whatever the hell we're done.